I'm looking at a pivot table I've made for the national minimum wage survey data, as we mentioned in a previous video, and I talked about there how to make the pivot table. In this video I want to show you how to use a basic pivot table to group data in a useful fashion. And for this example I'm going to look at the age data. So there was a question 2, please can you type in your age? A brief comment, I think that's a ridiculous question. The answer is clearly yes, people can type their age in, occasionally no, in which case they wouldn't. I think it would have been better to ask for people please type your age in rather than please can you. Anyway, I'll stop ranting about that. If I tick it by clicking this tick box, it puts that data into my pivot table, but it doesn't look very helpful, and let's talk about why. Because actually it's getting all of the ages in the data and adding them up because it thinks it's doing a sum. Now this is because it's numerical data, and Excel thinks that quite often with numerical data you want to add it up, and it's not wrong, you quite often do. In this case it's telling me that the total age of everyone in the survey was 97,500 years, and that's not very helpful. What I'd like to do is split up this data, so I can do that by grabbing this data and putting it into the rows column as well. And now it has given me a separate row for each age that people responded, but it's still adding it up, so it's telling me that all the 18-year-olds had a grand total of 90 years between them. I think that means there were 5 of them, but it would be better if it actually just counted them for me, and we need to be able to change that behavior. You can do that in 2 ways. You can either click on the sum thing down here, and just off the bottom of the screen there's a little value field settings there. And you can also see that by right-clicking on the number up here, the value field settings. However you do that, you get this menu which is telling you what it's doing with this field, and at the moment it's definitely summing it, and I would like it to count it. I could ask it to do the average. That's going to be also unhelpful in this case because I can predict that the 18-year-olds have an average age of 18, at least I'd hope so. Let's leave it on count, and hopefully clicking OK is going to actually count them. Yes, there are 5 of them, and 19-year-olds there are 7 of them. So that's great. We've made a pivot table that summarised the numbers of each age. It's like a frequency table, but it's still kind of spread out. It would be better if this was grouped. So I'm going to show you a way of grouping the data quite neatly here. If you click on one of the row labels anywhere in this column, you'll see some options at the top, and this is in the Analyze tab of the Pivot Table tools. There's a Group Selection, Ungroup and Group Field. You can also get these things by right-clicking. You can get some Group and Ungroup options. I'm just going to show you what happens if I click on Group Field here. And it has some automatic suggestions, auto because these things are ticked under the auto thing here. It's suggesting we could start at 18, run to 86, and group them in tens. So let's try that without doing anything else other than the automatic suggestions. And you can see that it has grouped these into some nice groups. 18 to 27, 149 people, and so on and so forth. Now, what bugs me about this is that these groups aren't the most intuitive groups I would choose. I would like to have a bit more control. So to go back, I'm going to click on Ungroup. I'm going to group field again, but this time I'm going to tell it to start at 10 because at least then I know it will go up in tens from 10. And if I click OK, I think these are slightly more intuitive groups, 10 to, in the teens, in the 20s, in the 30s. And having got this, it's rather obvious that it would be nice to see that it's clearly peaking in the middle, but a graph would be great at this point, and pivot tables can include graphs. If you click on the Insert tab, you can go to a pivot chart, and it will do something sensible if you click on this, hopefully. This time it's calling it a clustered column. If I click on that, or just hover over it, you can see that it's giving me like a bar chart of these groups. And if I change the groups, it would obviously give me the different groups there. And if I click OK on this, it will put it into my spreadsheet or pivot chart, if you like. Now, I don't like it a lot. It's kind of acting a bit like a histogram, and it doesn't look like a histogram, and there's other videos in this series about doing histograms properly. Unfortunately, Excel still seems to be unable to do histograms, despite that being an option in the charts. Let's not rant about that too much. This is a quick way to get a chart which may be useful. However, if you wanted to make a little bit more control happen over these groups, let me show you how to do this manually. So if I click on the row labels and go back to the Analyze tab, I can ungroup these things. We're back to it by doing this by rows, but let's say I wanted to just put these 3 in a group on their own. I could click on Group Selection, or I could right-click and say Group, and now I've got Group 1, which contains 18, 19 and 20, and I can collapse that to see that Group 1 has a total of 23 people in it. Now I've got these groups. I could rename this group 1, which isn't very helpful. I could rename that as 18 to 20, for example. And once you've started grouping this way, you realise if you can collapse them, you can collapse that one. That's not very helpful. But you could start grouping other things together completely manually, and then whatever you do to the table or turn it into a chart will your manually created groups will be reflected. So there's a way of grouping data basically with a pivot chart. There is more we can do with group data, and we'll look at that in another video.